Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. Today I'm going to be bringing you the story of what is possibly the least successful rally car of all time, the Citroen BX 4TC. In this video I'm going to talk to you about how this car evolved, how it was planned, how it came to be, the Evolution, which is the full-on rally version, this car. I'll also talk about the road-going version, and incredibly, both were complete flops, not just one or the other. Both were terrible flops for Citroen. But I'll also talk about this particular car, why the current owner decided he absolutely had to have it, and what his plans for the future are for this car. Citroen had always been a really innovative car company, and that was both the beauty of the cars, but also ultimately its downfall. By 1976, it had been taken over by Peugeot. It was blighted by financial difficulties. And there was a new Citroen car which was due to reverse their fortunes. That was the BX, and the BX turned out to be a really big success. It was sold between 1982 and 1994, and there were 2 million units produced. It retained a lot of Citroen's sort of quirky features, but made the car a little bit more usable day to day and a little bit less expensive to maintain. There were some hot versions. There was a Sport, there was a GT, GTI 16 valve, one of which I had very recently, which I absolutely adored. But at this time, I guess Citroen were facing a little bit of an existential crisis because they had been taken over. They were keen to bolster their image, and although they had been competing reasonably successfully in the lower tiers of rallying, they had no presence in the top tier of Group B. And this is where this project, the 4TC, actually starts up. The Citroen that we know today has had innumerable successes, I think winning the WRC Championship about 9 years in a row in the mid-2000s. However, back in the day, that wasn't the case. The head of the Citroen Rally team was called Guy Verrier, and he was a really passionate advocate of Citroen itself, and that's partly what led to the downfall of this rally program. 5 concept cars were initially considered as a Group B contender. At least one of those concepts was a full-on special with a space frame chassis, McPherson strut suspension, a 16-valve engine. It was a really bespoke car, which is what you should do for Group B, because that was the beauty of that championship. It's that it really allowed for almost unlimited freedom, and that's what you had to do to win. Unfortunately, Guy was so passionate about Citroen that he decided, and it was misguided, but I do understand why he did it. He decided that they wanted to try and stick somewhat with the original BX in producing this Group B monster. As a result, the prototypes that were picked were the 4th and the 5th, the 4th being for the Evolution, the rally car, and the 5th being for the road-going version. So what did that actually mean in terms of technical spec? Well, it meant that rather going for a completely bespoke setup with a space frame, proper North standard-ish independent suspension, and advanced engine, they actually retained as much of the BX as they could. So this part of the car is pretty much Citroen BX. So the monocoque construction is the same. There is a little bit of space frame added, but not actually very much. On top of which, they decided to stick with a hydraulic system. Again, I understand why they wanted to do that, but it was a bit of a foolhardy decision at the time. They stuck with a hydraulic system in terms of the braking, in terms of the suspension. It really does follow the pattern of a BX system. It's obviously changed, but it is there. The main stuff is there. And that was a system that hadn't really ever been used or tested for rallying, and that would bring its own complications. On top of that, they decided that they were going to have a four-wheel drive car, so the engine was going to have to be longitudinal. Because they are keeping the chassis, or the main portion of the chassis from the BX, that means that the engine had to go really far up in front of the car. Indeed, the front of this car has been lengthened to accommodate it. But a particularly weird decision that was made is, okay, let's make it four-wheel drive, we'll have to have a longitudinal engine, we'll modify it to suit, But being a longer car, it was particularly important that it should really have 3 differentials. They didn't bother with that. There is no centre differential in this car. Another really, really odd decision has to be the engine that they decided to use for the 4TC. This is a single overhead cam, 8-valve, iron block engine, which dates back to a Chrysler Europe engine from the 70s. It manages to put out 380 horsepower, which sounds respectable, but in actual fact, you have to consider that the minimum weight limit in Group B was 950 kilos. And because of the way they decided to develop this car and keep it so much based on the BX, this actually weighed 1,150 kilos. That's a full 200 kilos more than the other, or some of the other Group B cars. Not only that, but having moved the engine so far forward, that obviously caused weight distribution issues, and not having that centre differential further hampered the car. However, that is not the end of the problems that the 4TC had. Not many Group B cars actually look pretty, but I think you have to agree that the 4TC in particular looks a bit ungainly with that massive front bonnet. So much so that it was known as Group B's Cyrano de Bergerac, who's a French author who is renowned for having quite a big nose. And that is something that I myself can understand, not being shy in that department. However, yeah, it didn't look great. Quite an interesting thing about this, because of the hydro pneumatic suspension, there's quite an involved procedure to start up, and I'm going to get Gary to just demonstrate it to you. All right, Gary, take us through the starting procedure.
Obviously, clutch down to start with, stop the transmission drag.
Yeah.
And then you've got a fuel pump cut out.
Yeah.
And an enrichment device. It's difficult to start because it's actually trying to pressurise the system to lift it.
Okay.
And operate all the brakes, the steering, everything is controlled by one pump.
So why is it you have to switch off the fuel pump when you're trying to start it?
It's just a voltage drain.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So to stop, because there's 2 big massive pumps in there.
Okay.
So it's an early type fuel injection. So
yeah.
It doesn't have to be pressurised all the time.
Oh, I see. So only when you're going,
so
well, you're using a lot of fuel, then you switch it on.
As soon as it fires, you release the fuel pumps. And
okay, so it's clutch in. So that's all off. Then
ignition.
Ignition.
So you can hear the pumps running now.
Yeah. Switch pumps off.
Pumps off.
Yeah.
Enrichment.
And things really started to go wrong when the 4TC was actively rallied. It took part in 3 rallies. In the Monte Carlo rally, it came 6th, and that was the best time, and I think that's the only time one of the cars actually finished. The other car in the Monte Carlo rally had suspension failure, which was going to be a sign of things to come. The next rally was in Sweden, and both cars didn't finish. At that point, Citroen decided that things couldn't continue as they were. They took the car out for the next 3 rounds in order to improve it. I think I got slightly confused there, actually. It wasn't the Monte Carlo rally where it finished 6th, it was Sweden. It didn't finish at all in Monte Carlo or in the Acropolis, so 6th position was its best ever and only finish. This is a phase 2 car. I don't know if you call it a phase 2, but it's one of the cars that were improved. So all the bodywork was Kevlar, several things were changed. There's an oil reservoir that was moved to the back because it was boiling up front. But there was really a bit of a limitation. So that hydro pneumatic suspension, which can be so good on the road, had 3 inches less travel than the conventional suspension. That's not really a great thing for rallies. The other big problem was that because of the weight distribution and because it didn't have a centre diff, it was the car that had to be driven really roughly to get it round corners. As a result, it became much more prone to breakdowns, especially with the suspension system. The last rally that the 4TC was campaigned in was the Acropolis Rally in Greece. They entered not 2 this time, but 3 cars, and not one of them finished. I think 2 failed again with suspension, 2 broke down with suspension failure, and the other one had an accident. But that was the final nail on the head for Citroen, and they decided that was going to be the end of it. That decision was actually helped because Group B was coming to an end, so it made it a lot easier for them to decide to withdraw. But what they did was they bought up all the cars, or as many of the cars as possible that were around. And that accounts for it being actually such a sought after car today for collectors. Although it was really remarkably unsuccessful, they are so rare. Only 6 of these Evolution examples are actually in existence today. The road-going version retained this car's idiosyncratic looks, but it was actually narrower whilst retaining that incredibly long nose. So if anything, it actually looked even more bizarre than this car. On top of which, it was, like its rally cousin, a complete and utter flop. So they were supposed to produce 200 cars for homologation purposes. However, they only got round to producing 105. Even then, only 85 of those were sold by 1988. At that point, Citroen was really struggling with the 4TC and with the road-going version in particular, because they'd already come out of the rally side of things. The rally cars were all bought up and they were either crushed or stripped, or as many of them as possible. That means that only 6 examples of this car exist today. The road-going version soldiered on for a little bit, but Citroen were having so many problems with reliability, honouring warranties, that they decided the best thing was to buy them all back and strip them or crush them and get rid of them. So they offered to buy them back from the existing owners. It's rumoured sometimes at double the price. As a result, only 30% of the road-going cars actually exist today. As well as the reliability problems, they were reputed to actually be not very good at all. So they were slow, they didn't handle very well. So really, an unmitigated disaster for Citroen, and you have to feel for them because the idea of the project makes complete sense. It was about validating Citroen's engineering, and it was just a shame that perhaps it was the wrong class, they didn't quite have enough money. It's one of those stories that does make you feel for the company. There's really good reason to believe that this is one of the 3 Acropolis cars, most probably Andrew A's car. It's quite difficult to tell for sure because, as mentioned, Citroen decided to destroy any evidence of these cars and just took all the documentation off. However, there are lots of interesting clues. The first is this boost gauge, which, when the car arrived, was completely black, so it looked like a blanking plate. However, Gary, who's looking after this car, when he took it out, he discovered that that wasn't the case at all. There is a boost gauge there, which incidentally is from a helicopter, would you believe, but it is filled with fluid in order to dampen the needle. That fluid had boiled over and gone black. Now, that points to the car having been in a really high temperature environment, which would have been that rally, the Acropolis Rally at the time. There are more hints. The car comes with rally plates, and the Acropolis plates, they're obviously all different depending on the rally, completely match up to the holes in the bonnet. Lastly, Andrew A's car pulled out of that rally with damage. One of the rear wheels came off and there was damage to the back. There are photos to show that, and this car shows signs of that particular damage. So there's good reason to believe that this could be one of those very 3 cars and Andrew A's own car. So it was a complete flop, and it's actually also quite an ugly car, so why on earth would you want to own it? Well, conversely, the lack of success is what makes them so desirable today, because so many of them have been crushed, only 6 exist, that the rarity in itself makes it a very desirable car. The current owner, as well, used to follow the Lombard RAC Rally when he was a teenager, and he has managed to build up a collection of cars. This is such an individual thing that I totally understand why he wanted to get hold of one. What's he going to do with it? Well, he's recommissioning it. He's going to get it registered for the road, and then he's going to campaign it, which I think is absolutely fantastic. If you want to follow more, there is, I think, an Instagram page with his collection on there. I'll put the link up now and I'll put it in the video description. Also, Gary is the technician who's looking after this car. He does look after quite a lot of vintage rally stuff. So if you're interested in getting hold of him because you have a classic rally car, then I'll put his details in the video description as well. If you haven't subscribed, please do if you like what you've seen, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next video. Thank you all so much for watching.